Okay, in this lesson we are going to learn how to classify triangles. So the first way we're going to learn how to classify them is by their angles. Okay, so if you look at the triangle and all three angles are acute, we simply call this an acute triangle. If a triangle has one obtuse angle, we call it an obtuse triangle. If it has one right angle like this, we call it a right triangle. And if all three are congruent, we call it equal angular. Okay, so we're going to practice this. We are going to go over this figure on the right here, and we're going to talk about how we would classify the triangle based on its angles. So this first one is saying triangle CDE. So what you're going to do to find that angle is you're going to go, okay, here's angle, here's point C, and then you're going to go to D. So here's D, C, D, and then E is right here. So that means it's talking about this triangle right here. And look, this has one right angle. We know that because it has this little square right here. So because it has one right angle, this is going to be a right triangle. That's how we would classify this guy. This is a right triangle. And then for triangle, you're welcome to just put this symbol here. Or you can write that right triangle, okay? So there's that guy. Now, let's find another triangle. Triangle BCE. So here's angle angle B. Go to C, it says, and then go to E. So that means it's talking about this triangle here. Now, I'm looking at this and I see one obtuse angle. So this is an obtuse triangle. And I think I'm going to write this in using text instead of trying to do it with my mouse. So give me a second. This one is an obtuse triangle. Okay. All right, so now we've got two of those classified. And then let's go to the next one, which is ABE. I'm going to do that in a green. ABE. So here's A. There's point A. It says go to B. Okay, here's B. And an E. So it must be talking about this triangle here. Now, if we look, these symbols right here mean that this is all congruent. So all three of those sides are congruent, and we know that that means it is equiangular, as it says up there in our notes. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to type out equiangular. There we go, equiangular triangle. All right, move this guy into place so it looks a little bit better. All right, now let's do the next triangle, BDE. Let's find it. And actually what I'm going to do first is I'm going to erase some of this nonsense so that it's a bit easier to see what we have going on here. I'm going to erase this really well because I know it drives you guys crazy when I miss a tiny part of this and then you're really distracted. So hopefully I'm getting all of it. Okay. All right, next up, BDE. So start with B. Here's B. Go all the way to D, it says. And E. Okay. Well, I know that this angle would have been 90, so that means this one has to be more than 90. So I'm going to go ahead and call that a obtuse angle as well, or an obtuse triangle. I'm actually just going to go ahead and hit copy on this thing. Nope. It's having a fit. It doesn't like that. Okay, that's fine. So, obtuse triangle. Okay, last one. CFE. Let's go ahead and look at that. Let me first erase triangle BDE so that we can see this a little bit better. Okay, while I'm doing this, go ahead and see if you can identify where CFE is. Okay, CFE. So here is point C, and we're going to go to F, N into E. Well, I'm looking at this, and I know that there's a little bit of that box that got cut off. So that means this angle cannot be 90. And these other ones look pretty small as well. So I'm going to go ahead and say that all of these are less than 90, which makes this an acute angle. Or an acute triangle, excuse me. Okay, so there is a classification for every single type of triangle. All right, now the next thing we're going to talk about is classifying our angles by sides. So go down here. Okay, and we are classifying angles by sides. We just learned how to classify them using angles, and now we're going to do it based on their sides. So when all three sides are congruent, we call that an equilateral triangle. All right, go ahead and put that in, equilateral triangle, when all three sides are congruent, meaning the same size. All right, the next one has kind of a funky name, but when there's only two sides congruent and this third side is not the same, so just 1, 2 congruent, this one's not the same, it's called an isosceles triangle. And then the third type is when absolutely none of the sides are the same, all three are different lengths. We call that a scalene triangle. All right, now we're going to look at a triangle in this figure, and we're going to identify what it is, just like we did with the last section with angles. So first, triangle JKM. So I'm going to find that. Here's angle J, here's angle K, and here is angle M all the way across here. Okay, now if I'm looking at this, I know that these three angles are the same, so that means this angle cannot be the same as, this side cannot be the same as this side. So I know those two are different, so we definitely don't have an equilateral triangle here. And I don't believe that this side and this side are the same, because otherwise it would have told us with those marks. So I'm thinking all three of these are different, so I'm going to go ahead and call that a scalene triangle, because all three are different. Okay, next up we have triangle KLN, and we're going to try to find it. So here's K, point K is right there, we go to L and then to N. Okay, now if we look at this, this is telling us that these two are exactly the same. So we know it could be, it's not scalene, right, because we have at least two that are the same. It could be isosceles, but if we look at this third one is not the same. So I would say we're dealing with an isosceles triangle and not an equilateral triangle, because otherwise all three would be the same. So because two are the same and not the third one, this is an isosceles triangle. Okay, all right, let's go to the third one. So this third triangle they want us to find is JKN. So let's identify that. Here's J, go up to K, and then down to N. That means we're talking about this triangle here. And if we look at this, all three sides are the same because they all have this little tick mark here telling us that these are the same. So I know that this is going to be an equilateral triangle. So I'm going to go ahead and write that in right here, that what I'm dealing with here, because all three sides are the same, is equilateral triangle. All right, there you go. That's how to classify them by sides. Okay, in this last section, it wants you to be able to name these both by angles and by sides. So let's do angles first, since that's the first thing that we learned. If we look at this one right here, notice that this has one right angle. Well, we know that when something has a right angle, it is a right triangle. So I'm going to do all the angle definitions in red, and we'll pick another color for the sides. So this is a right, this is a right triangle. I want to be consistent with my coloring so that this makes more sense. Okay. So this is obviously a right triangle. Okay, let's go to the next one while we're in our angles mode. And I look at this, and this is more than 90 degrees. So because this has at least, well, it can only have one obtuse angle, I'm going to call this then an obtuse triangle, right? So this is an obtuse. Let me get my key back. Okay, we know that one. And then it looks like this last one, all three angles are less than 90. They're all 60. So because all three are acute, we're going to call this an acute triangle right here. Okay, I think it's easiest to just get in one mode, do all angles or do all sides, and then go back and do the sides or the angles. Personally, it's easier for me not to switch gears and to talk about one thing at a time. But you do it however you would like, as long as it gets done. All right, now I'm going to talk about sides. So I'm going to look at the sides here. Now, I'm seeing that this has two equal sides, and we know from the last section that that is called an isosceles triangle. Okay, so we're going to write that in right there. That is also an isosceles triangle. So if it said classify it by angles, it's a right triangle. If it said classify it by sides, it's an isosceles triangle. We can also put these together and say this is a right isosceles triangle. That's also appropriate. Okay, I'm looking at the next one, and I'm not seeing, they would tell us if any of these were equal. So I'm going to assume that all three of these sides are different. So like this one is different than this one, which is different from this one. If they were the same, they would tell us like they did in number 9. So if they're not telling you, assume that they are different. And we have a word for when all three sides are different. It's called scalene. And we go, scalene triangle. You could say this is an obtuse scalene triangle as well, or just separate it like I've done here, because this is a little easier than switching gears back and forth. Okay, now in this next one, it shows us that all three sides are the same. We have a word for that too, equilateral. So because all three sides are the same, I'm going to get my text box out, and I'm going to say this is an equilateral triangle. And again, it's also okay to say acute equilateral triangle. Those mean the same thing, or you can separate it like I've done here, because I think it's a little bit easier for teaching to visualize here that these are separate types or separate categories, but they can be defining the same triangle, okay? So it should say down here, summarize today's lesson. If it doesn't, I still want you to do it because it is good for you. They've done lots of studies, and if you can summarize the lesson before and after, it is really good for your brain, helps you remember it. So what I want you to do is right here, you just learned how to classify triangles by angles and sides. Okay, that is what you just learned how to do.